Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's transmission. And this week we are talking about never question your impulses. That's the topic for this week. Never question your impulses, right? So, in our society, in the Western world in general, we are taught that to be impulsive is a negative thing. It's a bad thing, right? Something you don't want to do. Um, and to be labeled as such is not good, right? So, what I would argue is that your impulses are there for a reason. They exist for good reason, right? Your impulses are your soul's decisions, right? They are your soul's unfettered um, action steps, right? Your soul's unfettered way of expressing itself, right? Your soul's way of circumventing your logical mind, right? It's like a subconscious alarm clock, right? That happens during waking hours, right? When you're just going about your day in autopilot, and then suddenly you have an impulse to do something, right? So it's like your soul's way of jolting you awake and getting you to take action that's beneficial to you, right? In most situations. Okay, so the purpose of an impulse is for safety, right? So impulses help keep us safe on a physiological level, right? It tells you to make a turn here, right? Even though it doesn't make any sense, or um, your GPS is telling you something different. So it keeps us safe, right? Leave this place, go here, right? Take a step back. You've heard like numerous stories where a person's like, something just told me, I don't know why I took a different route to work that day. And they end up bypassing an accident, or the street just opened up to a big sinkhole or something like that. Um, Impulses also help remind you of your true self, right? By this, you love it, right? Remind you of who you are when you are being too linear of mind. And I'm guilty of this too, like overthinking things, or being too quote unquote what we call practical. But um, I believe I've spoken about this in a podcast before, or I've written about it. Like practicality can be a code word for boring, right, or predictable. So you're just thinking, let's say you're on a budget, and you go into a store and you're like, nope, I'm on a budget, and you do a great job of that, right? You stick to your budget and everything works out, right? But one day your impulse just tells you to buy something, right? You love it. It just tells you, and you're like, well, I probably shouldn't do this, right? This goes against my budget. But then you buy it and it ends up being of immense value to you, even if it's just on a very aesthetic level, right? Like, you love this. And then you go back to that store and it's gone, or, it just brings you happiness. So, for example, a minor example for me, I was like trying to be on a budget. You go, I'm buying toiletries, just one thing, that's all. And then I end up seeing something that just instinctively I was like, that's me. I love it. That's it. But then I was like, well, no, I'm supposed to stick to my budget, and I don't really need this, and blah, blah, blah. All of my logic started to kick in. And so I ended up staying at the store way longer than I needed to, just because I was going back and forth, right? It was like logic versus impulse. So in the end, I ended up being like, well, you know what? Whatever. This is what I want to do. I'll deal with it later. It wasn't unreasonable, at all in price. So it was just out of budget, right? Out of the logical, my linear way of thinking in that moment. So come to find out, I got it. Like, I end up loving the product. I'm like, how could I ever not do this? Buy this? Like, this literally, it was the last one in my size. Like, clearly this was for me to get. I wasn't even supposed to be in that particular store, like, but something led me to that one. So afterwards, it made so much sense. And the fact that it was inexpensive, and it just, everything made sense. And so what I derived from that was the feeling, the energy. I was so excited about it that I was inspired to create, right? To dance, to paint, to write. So, and earlier that day, I hadn't really been feeling inspired at all. So it's like little stuff like that you don't know the benefits immediately, right? That your impulses are trying to drive you to do. right? And it could also help you save money, right? In the end, because again, if you want something, you're gonna get it anyway. Last week's podcast, right? If you want to say something, you're gonna say it anyway. You might as well be in control of how you do it. Impulses also help you save time, right? So by bypassing your logical brain, right, your rational brain, in our left brain dominant society, right, you end up saving time on something that you already knew anyway, right? The brain has a relatively slow reaction time, right? So it's fast to us, but relative to our impulses, it's really slow. So in Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, right, he substantiates all of this with science, right, which is what people in the Eastern world and in Africa and Asia have known for thousands of years, right? We call it instinct. We say, oh, my first mind told me to do this, right? Something told me to do this, right? You can actually measure that now scientifically. So that, again, it saves you time. In a blink of an eye, go by your first instinct, your first impulse, right? Things like that. So in doing all of these things, you will strengthen your intuition, right? And that's the number one thing that, as inhabitants of Western society, we need to work on, right? Strengthening your intuition, because that's what has the answers anyway. You do. Not me, nobody else, right? Not the person next to you, not the person behind you, right? Nobody, not your parents, not your grandparents. Nobody has the answers for you but you, right? At the end of the day, even these little messages are meant to inspire you to listen to yourself, right? Not to just say, oh, do this, don't do. I mean, you can really do what you want to do, right? That's why you're alive. But at the end of the day, right, you have to listen to yourself. And we need more people listening to their heart, their intuition, their spirit, so that we can make the world a better place, right? Because your spirit has your highest needs and your highest sense of self. It has everything in mind, right? For the greater good, right? And not just for yourself, but for everybody, right? So it's looking out for the greatest good of the whole of society, everybody in the world. Whereas sometimes our egos, our left brains, may only be looking out for ourselves, right? Or very selfish, or the people that we know, right? How that benefits. Your impulses also teach you to trust yourself, right? That's a big one. If more people trusted themselves, then we would have less conflict, right? I spoke before about doubting yourself and doubting your dreams and the domino effect of doubt. Ooh, say that 10 times fast. Domino effect of doubt, domino effect of doubt, domino effect of doubt. And in trusting yourself, it helps you to solidify your relationships with yourself, right? And that is the number one most important relationship in this existence, point blank, period, right? Your relationship with yourself, because it affects and directly impacts your relationships with every single being and object and entity outside of yourself, be it a baby, your child, relatives, be it, a car, a trash can, right? Things like that. That's where it comes from. It is the most important thing that you can do, right? Solidifying your relationship with yourself and trusting yourself. So just think of people who kick cats or kick trash cans, and you're like, ooh, right, out of frustration with themselves, right? So you can tell how they treat themselves and the type of relationship that they have with themselves based on how they treat things outside of themselves, right? It's just a mirror that just keeps going back and forth, reflecting and absorbing and reflecting and absorbing, right? Okay. Lastly, your impulses will never, ever, ever lead you astray. Ever, ever, ever. They can never be wrong about people, about jobs, about situations, about events, anything like that. Even if they appear to initially be wrong, right? You say something or you do something, or, and you're like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Usually over time, it is revealed that your impulses and your instincts were actually correct. So I'll leave you with this last little story. I was recently visiting someone, right, in hospital, and I was with someone else, and I got in an elevator, and I didn't pay attention to the fact that when the elevator stopped, and other people got on, that wasn't the floor that I was supposed to be on, that I thought I was. So a person got on, the first time the elevator stopped, I just initially, instinctively, right, impulsively got off. And once I got off, I realized, I was like, oh man, this isn't the floor. Like, what was I doing? I wasn't thinking. That's what we say. I wasn't thinking, right? I just got off instinctively because somebody else got on. So then I got on, went to the floor that I thought I was supposed to be on. As soon as I got to the nurse's station, they're like, no, this person has been moved. And I just instinctively, immediately said, you don't even need to tell me which floor. I already know. Guess what floor it was? The floor that I got off on without thinking, right? So things like that, right? My instinct knew, my intuition knew, even though I had forgotten that this person was no longer on that floor, my instincts knew, right? So I just following my feet would have led me to the person faster than wasting time, going all the way up, waiting to talk to a nurse and all of this stuff. So that's just a mini example of why you should never question your impulses, right? You should never question your impulses. There's something in it that you're supposed to gain, right? Even if it's simply trusting yourself, right? And trusting your voice, which is just as valid, actually more valid than all of those ones swirling around you, right? Unless you have been diagnosed with something, and even that is in air quotes, diagnosed, right? With severe impulsivity to where you just murder people, right? You know, like psychopathic tendencies or something, then you really should be listening to every impulse and acting on them, right? Maybe it's just for you to be happy, right? Maybe your impulse is to say, go get ice cream, right? Something like that. Go outside, right? Leave work early. All right, that's all I have for this week. Thank you for listening. Love, live, light, laughter. Peace out. Bye.